Marcus Richardson straightened his expensive silk tie and checked his Rolex one more time before stepping out of his black BMW. The courthouse parking lot was busy with the usual morning rush of lawyers, defendants, and anxious families. But Marcus felt different today. Today was going to be special. He had been practicing law for 15 years, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. Known for his aggressive tactics and sharp tongue, Marcus had built a successful career by intimidating opponents and showing no mercy in the courtroom. His colleagues whispered that he could make witnesses cry and reduce opposing lawyers to stammering messes. As he walked toward the courthouse entrance, Marcus spotted someone he recognized from law school. Sarah Chen was standing near the steps, holding a worn leather briefcase and reviewing some papers. She looked older now, with a few gray streaks in her black hair, but Marcus remembered her clearly from their days at Stanford Law. Back then, Sarah had been the quiet girl who always sat in the front row, asking thoughtful questions and spending countless hours in the library. Marcus had found her boring and too serious. While he was networking at parties and making connections with professors, Sarah was buried in her books, studying cases that most students barely glanced at. A cruel smile spread across Marcus's face as memories flooded back. He remembered how he and his friends used to make fun of Sarah during study groups. They would deliberately exclude her from important review sessions and spread rumors that she only got good grades because professors felt sorry for her. Marcus had once publicly humiliated her during a mock trial, making jokes about her nervous speaking style that had left her in tears. Now, seeing her again after all these years, Marcus felt that familiar urge to assert his dominance. He had heard through the legal community grapevine that Sarah had struggled to find work at top law firms after graduation. While Marcus had landed a prestigious position at a major corporate firm right away, Sarah had apparently taken a job at some small public defender's office. Marcus adjusted his designer suit jacket and approached Sarah with confident steps. His Italian leather shoes clicked loudly on the concrete as he made his way over to where she stood. "Well, well, well," Marcus called out loudly enough for other people nearby to hear. "If it isn't Sarah Chen, I heard you were still around, fighting the good fight for criminals and deadbeats." Sarah looked up from her papers, and Marcus noticed she didn't seem surprised to see him. Her expression remained calm and professional, which only irritated him more. He had expected her to look flustered or intimidated. "Hello, Marcus," she said simply, closing her briefcase. "I see you're still as charming as ever." Several other lawyers had stopped to watch the interaction, sensing drama. Marcus loved having an audience, and he decided to put on a show. He knew that many of these people had heard stories about his courtroom victories and his ruthless reputation. "Charming. I prefer successful," Marcus replied with a laugh. "Speaking of which, what brings you to the big courthouse today? Don't tell me you finally landed a case that actually matters?" Sarah remained quiet, which only encouraged Marcus to continue. He gestured toward the impressive courthouse building behind them, its marble columns and grand architecture designed to intimidate. "You know, Sarah, I always wondered what happened to you after law school. I heard you couldn't get hired at any of the top firms. Something about not having the right personality for high-stakes litigation." Marcus's voice dripped with false sympathy. "It must be hard, watching your former classmates succeed while you're stuck defending petty thieves and drug dealers." A small crowd had gathered now, including several court reporters and junior lawyers who recognized Marcus's name. He was enjoying the attention and decided to push further. "I mean, look at us," Marcus continued, spreading his arms wide. "I'm driving a BMW, wearing a suit that costs more than most people make in a month, and representing Fortune 500 companies, and you're still carrying that same old briefcase from law school." Sarah's briefcase was indeed old and worn, with scratches on the leather and a broken clasp that she had to hold shut with her hand. But she didn't seem embarrassed by Marcus's observation. Instead, she simply nodded as if agreeing with him. "You're right, Marcus. This briefcase has seen better days. But it's served me well through hundreds of cases over the years," Sarah said calmly. "Sometimes the tools that look the most impressive aren't necessarily the most effective." Marcus laughed loudly, a sound that echoed off the courthouse steps. "Oh, that's rich coming from someone who couldn't even afford a decent briefcase after 15 years of practice. Tell me, Sarah, are you here today representing another homeless person charged with trespassing? Or maybe it's a teenager caught shoplifting?" The crowd was growing larger, and Marcus noticed several people recording the interaction with their phones. He loved the idea that his wit and dominance would be captured and possibly shared around the legal community. It would only add to his fearsome reputation. "Actually," Sarah said, checking her watch, "I should probably head inside. Unlike some people, I have important business to attend to." This response infuriated Marcus. How dare she dismiss him? He had been trying to humiliate her, to put her in her place, and she was acting as if he was just a minor inconvenience in her day. "Important business," Marcus repeated mockingly. "What could possibly be important about whatever small-time case you're handling? Are you going to ask the judge for another extension because your client can't afford to pay their parking tickets?" Sarah turned to face Marcus directly for the first time during their conversation. Her expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that Marcus couldn't quite read. It almost looked like amusement. "You know, Marcus, you haven't changed at all since law school, still making assumptions about people without knowing the facts, still believing that expensive clothes and fancy cars make someone a better lawyer," Sarah said quietly. "But I suppose some people never learn." Marcus felt his face growing red with anger. He wasn't used to anyone talking back to him, especially not someone he considered beneath his status. The crowd around them had grown even larger, and he could hear murmurs and whispers as people discussed what they were witnessing. "Listen here, Chen," Marcus said, stepping closer to Sarah and lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "I don't know what kind of confidence you think you've gained over the years, but you're still the same pathetic little girl from law school who couldn't argue her way out of a paper bag. The only difference is that now you're older and more desperate." Sarah simply smiled at him, an expression that made Marcus even angrier because it seemed genuine rather than forced or nervous. "We'll see about that, Marcus. We'll see about that very soon," she said, then turned and walked toward the courthouse entrance. Marcus watched her go, feeling frustrated that the encounter hadn't gone as he had planned. He had wanted to see her crumble, to watch her confidence shatter the way it had during law school. Instead, she had remained maddeningly calm throughout his attacks. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus heard several people whispering to each other. He caught fragments of their conversations and realized that not everyone had been impressed by his performance. Some seemed to think he had been unnecessarily cruel, while others wondered why Sarah had seemed so unfazed by his insults. Marcus shook off his doubts and headed into the courthouse himself. He had a big case today, representing a major corporation in a lawsuit that could result in millions of dollars in damages. It was exactly the kind of high-profile case that had made his career, and he was confident he would emerge victorious as usual. As he walked through the courthouse corridors, Marcus reflected on his encounter with Sarah. He told himself that she was probably just putting on a brave face to save what little dignity she had left. There was no way someone from her background, with her limited resources and second-rate career, could genuinely feel confident in a place like this. The courthouse was buzzing with activity as lawyers, clerks, and court officials went about their daily business. Marcus nodded to several colleagues he recognized, enjoying the respectful greetings and admiring glances his presence commanded. This was his world, and he ruled it with an iron fist. but something about Sarah's calm demeanor continued to bother him as he made his way toward the courtroom where his case would be heard. There had been something different about her, something that didn't match his memories of the timid law student she had once been. Marcus decided to put Sarah out of his mind and focus on the task at hand. He had a reputation to maintain and a case to win. Whatever pathetic legal matter had brought Sarah to the courthouse today was none of his concern. As he approached the courtroom doors, Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before a big legal battle. This was what he lived for: the chance to demonstrate his superiority and crush his opponents in front of an audience. Today would be just another victory to add to his impressive record. Little did Marcus know that his assumptions about Sarah Chen and her presence at the courthouse that morning were about to be proven spectacularly wrong in ways he could never have imagined. Marcus entered courtroom 12 with his usual swagger, carrying his polished briefcase and wearing his most confident expression. The large room was already filling with people: his corporate clients, opposing lawyers, court reporters, and spectators who had come to watch what was expected to be a significant legal battle. The case involved Richardson Holdings, a major real estate development company that Marcus had represented for over 5 years. They were being sued by a group of small business owners who claimed the company had used illegal tactics to force them out of their properties. Marcus had spent weeks preparing his defense, confident that he could discredit the plaintiffs and protect his wealthy clients from any financial liability. As Marcus set up his materials at the defense table, he noticed the plaintiff's legal team was smaller than he had expected. Just 2 lawyers from what appeared to be a small firm, surrounded by boxes of documents and looking somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur of the federal courthouse. Marcus smirked as he observed them. This was going to be easier than he had thought. His corporate clients had hired the best legal team money could buy, while the small business owners were obviously working with limited resources. It was going to be David versus Goliath, except this time Goliath was definitely going to win. The lead plaintiff attorney, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, approached Marcus during the pre-hearing preparation time. She looked nervous and kept adjusting her glasses as she spoke. "Mr. Richardson, I was hoping we could discuss a possible settlement," she said quietly. "My clients are willing to accept a reasonable offer to avoid a lengthy trial." Marcus laughed loudly enough for several people nearby to hear. "Settlement? Your clients should be grateful if they walk away from this without having to pay my legal fees. We have no intention of settling anything. We're going to trial, and we're going to win." Jennifer's face reddened, but she pressed on. "With respect, Mr. Richardson, we have some very strong evidence of misconduct by your clients, documents that show a pattern of harassment and illegal pressure tactics." "Evidence?" Marcus replied mockingly. "You mean the desperate accusations of failed business owners looking for someone to blame for their own incompetence? Judge Morrison has seen cases like this 100 times. He knows the difference between legitimate business practices and frivolous lawsuits." Marcus had specifically requested Judge Morrison for this case because he had a reputation for being tough on what he considered nuisance lawsuits. The judge was known for his no-nonsense approach and his tendency to side with established businesses over individual plaintiffs. Marcus was confident this choice would give him a significant advantage. As the morning progressed, Marcus continued his intimidation tactics. He made loud comments about the opposing team's inexperience and questioned their legal strategies within earshot of court personnel. He wanted everyone in the building to know that this case was already decided in his mind. When the court clerk announced that proceedings would begin in 30 minutes, Marcus noticed something odd. Judge Morrison hadn't arrived yet, which was unusual because he was typically very punctual. Marcus checked his phone and saw a message from the court administration office. "Last-minute schedule change due to judicial reassignment. New presiding judge will be announced shortly." Marcus frowned. He had specifically chosen this courthouse and this timeline because he knew Judge Morrison would be presiding. But last-minute changes happened sometimes in the legal system, and Marcus was confident enough in his case that it shouldn't matter who was sitting on the bench. As lawyers and spectators began filing into the courtroom for the formal start of proceedings, Marcus took his place at the defense table. His corporate clients sat behind him, well-dressed executives who radiated the kind of confidence that came with wealth and power. The opposing legal team looked much less imposing. The small business owners, who were the plaintiffs, sat together on the other side of the courtroom. Many of them middle-aged people who had clearly spent their life savings on legal fees to bring this case. Marcus felt no sympathy for them. In his mind, they had made poor business decisions and were now trying to blame others for their failures. The bailiff stood up and called for everyone's attention. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Sarah Chen." Marcus felt as though someone had punched him in the stomach. He stood up automatically with everyone else, but his mind was reeling. It couldn't be the same Sarah Chen. There had to be some mistake. Maybe it was a different person with the same name. But as the door to the judge's chambers opened, Marcus's worst nightmare walked into the courtroom. Sarah Chen emerged wearing the black robes of a federal judge, carrying herself with the dignity and authority that came with one of the most respected positions in the American legal system. She looked completely different from the woman Marcus had humiliated on the courthouse steps just hours earlier. The same person who had stood quietly while he mocked her old briefcase was now the most powerful person in the room. Marcus felt his legs trembling as the full realization hit him. Sarah wasn't some struggling public defender handling minor cases. She was a federal judge. Not only that, but she was the federal judge who would be presiding over his most important case of the year. As Sarah took her seat behind the bench, her eyes briefly met Marcus's across the courtroom. Her expression was completely professional, showing no sign of their earlier encounter. But Marcus could swear he saw the faintest hint of that same amused smile she had given him on the courthouse steps. "Please be seated," Judge Chen said, her voice carrying easily throughout the large courtroom. "I apologize for the last-minute change in judicial assignment. Judge Morrison had a family emergency and had to recuse himself from today's proceedings. I'll be presiding over Richardson Holdings versus Walsh et al." Marcus slowly sank into his chair, his mind racing. How was this possible? How had Sarah gone from being the timid law student he remembered to a federal judge? Federal judgeships were among the most prestigious positions in the legal profession, requiring years of exceptional experience and presidential appointment. Jennifer Walsh, the lead plaintiff attorney, stood up and approached the bench. "Your Honor, we're ready to proceed with opening statements." "Very good," Judge Chen replied. "Mr. Richardson, are you and your clients prepared to begin?" Marcus realized that Judge Chen was addressing him directly. He stood up on shaking legs. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense is ready." As he spoke, Marcus's voice cracked slightly. He couldn't help but think about every cruel word he had said to Sarah just hours earlier. He had mocked her career, insulted her appearance, and treated her with complete disrespect. And now she held his client's fate in her hands. Judge Chen nodded professionally. "Before we begin with opening statements, I want to address the court about maintaining proper decorum during these proceedings. This is a federal courtroom, and I expect all parties to conduct themselves with the dignity and respect that this institution deserves." As she spoke, Judge Chen's eyes seemed to linger on Marcus for just a moment longer than necessary. Marcus felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. "I want to be particularly clear that any behavior that could be construed as harassment, intimidation, or unprofessional conduct will not be tolerated in my courtroom," Judge Chen continued. "The legal profession demands that we treat each other with courtesy and respect, regardless of our personal opinions or past experiences." Marcus's face was burning with embarrassment. He was certain that Judge Chen was referring to his behavior on the courthouse steps. though she was being professional enough not to mention it directly. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. He had spent the morning trying to humiliate someone he thought was beneath him, only to discover that she was actually far more successful and powerful than he could have imagined. Sarah Chen had achieved something that Marcus, despite all his arrogance and ambition, had never even dreamed of reaching. Federal judgeships were lifetime appointments that required not just legal expertise, but also the highest levels of integrity and respect from the legal community. The fact that Sarah had been appointed to such a position meant that her career had been not just successful, but exemplary. Marcus tried to focus on his opening statement, but his thoughts kept returning to the morning's encounter. How many people had witnessed his cruel behavior? How many court personnel and fellow lawyers had seen him mock and belittle a federal judge? His reputation, which he had worked so hard to build, could be destroyed if word of his conduct spread through the legal community. As Judge Chen called for the plaintiff's opening statement, Marcus watched her carefully. She was completely professional, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. There was no sign that she was allowing their personal history to influence her judicial duties, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his world had just changed dramatically. The woman he had dismissed as a failure was now in a position to control his professional fate. The briefcase he had mocked belonged to someone who had achieved the pinnacle of legal success. The quiet demeanor he had mistaken for weakness was actually the confidence that came with genuine accomplishment and respect. Marcus realized that he had fundamentally misunderstood what he had witnessed that morning. Sarah's calm response to his attacks hadn't been the desperate dignity of someone with nothing left to lose. It had been the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she had achieved. As the proceedings continued, Marcus found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on his legal arguments. All he could think about was the conversation on the courthouse steps and how dramatically his perspective on that encounter had changed in just a few short hours. As the trial progressed throughout the day, Marcus found himself in an impossible situation. Every legal argument he made was met with sharp, incisive questions from Judge Chen. Her knowledge of federal law was encyclopedic, and she caught inconsistencies in his arguments that other judges might have missed. "Mr. Richardson," Judge Chen said during his cross-examination of a key witness, "you're citing Morrison versus Pacific Development, but I believe you're misrepresenting the court's holding in that case. Would you like to revisit your argument?" Marcus felt his face burning as he realized she was absolutely right. In his nervous state, he had incorrectly cited a case that actually supported the plaintiff's position rather than his own. It was the kind of basic error that he would normally never make, but his concentration was completely shattered. "Your Honor, I may have misspoken about the specific holding," Marcus stammered, frantically shuffling through his papers to find the correct citation. Judge Chen waited patiently while Marcus corrected himself, but the damage was done. His corporate clients were exchanging worried glances behind him, and he could feel their confidence in his abilities evaporating with each passing hour. Meanwhile, the plaintiff's legal team was performing much better than Marcus had expected. Jennifer Walsh, whom he had dismissed as inexperienced that morning, was presenting a compelling case with well-organized evidence and clear legal arguments. Under Judge Chen's fair but thorough questioning, the plaintiffs were able to present evidence of systematic harassment and illegal business practices by Richardson Holdings. During a brief recess, Marcus's lead client, Robert Richardson, pulled him aside for an urgent conversation. "What the hell is going on, Marcus?" Richardson demanded in an angry whisper. "You told us this was going to be an easy win. You said Judge Morrison would see through their frivolous claims. Now we've got some unknown judge asking questions that make us look like criminals." Marcus struggled to explain the situation without revealing the full extent of his morning encounter with Judge Chen. "There was a last-minute judicial reassignment. Judge Chen is very thorough in her examination of the evidence." "Thorough? Richardson's voice was rising dangerously. "She's treating us like we're the defendants in a criminal trial. And you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you even prepared for this case?" Marcus tried to regain his composure, but he could see that his clients were losing faith in him. Richardson Holdings had paid his firm hundreds of thousands of dollars for legal representation, and they expected results. The possibility that he might lose this case was becoming more real with each passing hour. As court resumed for the afternoon session, Judge Chen called for the defense's closing arguments. Marcus stood up on unsteady legs, his earlier confidence completely gone. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now he could barely remember his key talking points. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "the defense maintains that Richardson Holdings engaged in standard business practices that are common throughout the real estate industry." Judge Chen leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Richardson, the evidence presented today includes recorded phone conversations, email chains, and witness testimony suggesting systematic intimidation tactics. How do you reconcile your claim of standard business practices with this documentation?" Marcus felt trapped. The evidence was indeed damaging, but he had planned to rely on Judge Morrison's tendency to dismiss such claims as exaggerated complaints from unsuccessful business owners. Judge Chen, however, was clearly taking every piece of evidence seriously and evaluating it on its legal merits. "Your Honor, we believe that the plaintiffs have taken isolated incidents and communications out of context," Marcus replied weakly. "Isolated incidents?" Judge Chen's voice remained professional, but there was an edge to it that made Marcus's stomach clench. "Mr. Richardson, we've heard testimony from 12 different business owners describing remarkably similar experiences. We've seen email communications that appear to follow a coordinated pattern. Are you suggesting that this is all coincidental?" Marcus realized that he was not just losing the case, he was being professionally dismantled in front of a courtroom full of witnesses. Judge Chen's questions were exposing the weaknesses in his defense strategy that he had hoped to gloss over through aggressive rhetoric and intimidation. As Marcus struggled to respond, he caught sight of Jennifer Walsh at the plaintiff's table. She was watching the proceedings with obvious satisfaction, clearly recognizing that the tide had turned decisively in her client's favor. The young lawyer, whom Marcus had dismissed as inexperienced, was about to win a major victory against one of the region's most successful corporate law firms. "Your Honor," Marcus said desperately, "I request a brief continuance to allow my clients time to review the court's concerns and potentially consider settlement negotiations." Judge Chen's expression remained neutral, but Marcus thought he detected a hint of disappointment in her voice. "Mr. Richardson, your clients have had months to prepare for this trial. The evidence has been available through discovery for weeks. I see no grounds for a continuance at this stage of the proceedings." Marcus felt his last hope slipping away. Without the possibility of delaying the trial, he was going to have to face the consequences of his poor preparation and his shattered confidence. Judge Chen turned to address the entire courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented during today's proceedings, this court finds that Richardson Holdings did engage in systematic harassment and intimidation tactics designed to force the plaintiff business owners to abandon their properties below fair market value." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he realized what was happening. Judge Chen was ruling against his clients, and she was doing it decisively based on the legal merits of the case. "Furthermore," Judge Chen continued, "the court finds that these actions constitute violations of federal fair business practices, statutes, and local harassment ordinances. The plaintiffs are entitled to damages in the amount of $2.3 million plus reasonable attorney fees and court costs." The courtroom erupted in cheers from the plaintiffs and their supporters, while Marcus's corporate clients sat in stunned silence. Richardson Holdings had just suffered a devastating legal and financial defeat that would likely cost them far more than the money they had tried to save through their illegal tactics. As Judge Chen banged her gavel to restore order, Marcus realized that his reputation was in ruins. Word of his poor performance would spread quickly through the legal community, especially given the high-profile nature of the case and the substantial damages awarded to the plaintiffs. Robert Richardson and the other corporate executives were already gathering their materials and speaking in urgent whispers about damage control and appeals. Marcus knew that they would likely fire his firm and demand a refund of their legal fees. As the courtroom began to clear, Marcus remained seated at the defense table, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his defeat. He had entered the courthouse that morning as a successful, arrogant lawyer who believed he could intimidate anyone who crossed his path. He was leaving as a professional failure whose career might never recover from this humiliating loss. Judge Chen finished her paperwork and prepared to leave the bench. As she stood up, she glanced once more in Marcus's direction. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Marcus saw something in her expression that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't cruelty either. It was the look of someone who understood that justice had been served in more ways than one. As Marcus finally gathered his materials and prepared to face his client's anger, he reflected on the day's events. His morning encounter with Sarah Chen had revealed his true character, his willingness to attack someone he perceived as weak or unsuccessful. But the day's proceedings had revealed her true character as well, her commitment to fairness, legal excellence, and professional integrity. The woman Marcus had tried to humiliate had proven herself to be everything he had always claimed to be but never actually was. She had achieved genuine success through merit and hard work, while his apparent success had been built on intimidation and connections rather than legal skill. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse that evening, he knew that his life had changed forever. The cruel words he had spoken that morning had come back to haunt him in ways he could never have imagined. Sarah Chen had taught him a lesson about respect, humility, and the true meaning of professional success, though it was a lesson that had come at the cost of his career and reputation. The story would become legendary in the local legal community. Lawyers would tell and retell the tale of the arrogant attorney who tried to humiliate a federal judge on the courthouse steps, then had to argue his most important case in front of her just hours later. It would serve as a warning about the dangers of arrogance and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their apparent status or position. For Sarah Chen, the day represented not revenge, but vindication. She had not allowed Marcus's cruel behavior to influence her judicial duties, but his defeat in her courtroom had been total and decisive, based purely on the legal merits of the case. Justice had been served, and the legal system had worked exactly as it was supposed to, protecting the vulnerable from those who would abuse their power and position. The worn leather briefcase that Marcus had mocked that morning contained the legal expertise and moral authority that had just destroyed his career and saved the livelihoods of 12 small business owners. Sometimes, as Sarah had noted, the tools that look the most impressive aren't necessarily the most effective.